Even though he was a fierce critic of the government, the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu received a moving tribute from the presidency. He passed away at his Cape Town home this morning. Tutu led South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the unenviable task of healing the gaping wounds of apartheid. The commission, as you'll remember, was created by Nelson Mandela's Government of National Unity in 1995. Well, Tutu served in that commission along with 16 other people. One of them was Mary Burton, who joins me now for a reflection. Ms. Burton, thank you for your time, and I don't even know where to start. Just your own reaction and sense of reflection upon hearing the news of the passing of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to remember such a wonderful man. I did know within the last few days that he was fading, and he's been in all our thoughts over these days, as has, of course, wonderful Mama Leah and all his family. So I'd like to take this moment to extend condolences to all of them. But he leaves us the most incredible legacy. And I think what he would want most of all is for people to pursue the work that he began in this world and carry it forward, so that we can make the change in the world that is what he really longed for and didn't in the end live to see completely accomplished. So obviously my closest connection with him was during the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and he really lived the values of that commission. He could be a very angry person, but he had the capacity to overcome that anger and to forgive and to reach out to other people in a way to which almost always they responded in the same spirit in which he had addressed them. It was an incredibly demanding time in his life, pulling him in so many directions, coming face to face with all the memories accumulated over his life up until that point, and now being reflected in the testimonies which were being heard at the TRC. And one of the memories that I have particularly is the way in which those brave people who came forward to testify at the commission longed to be greeted by him. The moments at the beginning of the public hearings when he mingled among them, spoke to each one, embraced them, talked to them, made opportunities for them to tell him their feelings, were part of the healing process. If only every single one of the people who made statements to the TRC could have experienced that same moment. But what we hoped was through the public testimonies, people would vicariously feel that love and embrace that he reached out to them. He could be very funny too, and often broke moments of difficulty and tension with his ability to bring humor into any kind of discussion.
And I think we will reflect on that aspect of him, because I think it's an ever-present aspect. No matter what the situation was, he always had a way of seeing the humanity in it all, and also, where possible, to find humor in it all. But just take me back to the early days of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This had never been done in South Africa. South Africa itself was in uncharted terrain at the time, trying to reconcile with the past, but also trying to reconcile the various streams of division that had built up over decades, if not centuries. Now, there's the 17 of you, and you are all from very different backgrounds. He is from a religious background. My understanding is that there was even this debate around him wearing his full bishop's casaka, that garment that he would wear to those sessions. The story is told by the biographer of how that became something of a debating point. Just tell me about how he was able to marry the statutory, what was prescribed by the law, in terms of what was to happen with the TRC, with the, it seems to me you all agreed that this would be partly spiritual as well.
Yes, when we all met in December of the year before the Truth Commission really began its work, at the end of 1995, We came from different backgrounds, different faiths, no faiths at all, and somehow had to be welded into a unit. And he worked hard at that. He worked hard at making people get to know one another and respect one another's point of view. But it was clear, with him at the helm, this was not going to be a commission where matters of faith were pushed aside. And there was plenty of room for people of different faiths, but a commitment to caring about the values that he really believed in. And the matter that you were raising about whether he should wear his clerical robes did require quite a lot of discussion. People said, this is a lay commission. You are the chair of this commission, not in your capacity as an archbishop, but in your capacity as the chair of the commission. And the archbishop listened carefully to all the arguments. And in the end, he said, but I know that people want it. And he was quite right, because the symbolism that he brought, wearing his robes, and the other things that we did at the public hearings to emphasize the importance of these hearings, the lighting of candles, the singing of hymns, the inviting of young people's choirs to sing before we started the public hearings, all of that symbolism was an important part of demonstrating the importance of the testimonies that we were going to hear. And he brought to it the dignity of his clerical clothes in a way that people responded to whether or not they were Christian because of the elegance that he brought to those events.
Before I run out of time, Mary Burton, let me ask you about that poignant moment, that iconic moment when he breaks down. And my understanding is that it was only day 2 of the public hearings, and you simply see him there in the historical footage, breaking down and weeping. Here he is, supposed to be chairing this process, but, you know, just on day 2 of hearing the harrowing testimonies of victims of apartheid, he breaks down. He's quoted at the time in the Irish Times as having said, quote, "I thought I was tough. I thought I was going to survive today. I keep on thinking whether I am the right person for the Truth Commission," end quote. Just reflect for me, if you were there at that particular session, what happened there, just that moment that led him to break down, and how you interpreted it?
That first public hearing in East London was harrowing for everybody. We learned our way as we went along later, and I suppose we did become a bit more able to control feelings. But that day was a terrible day, and we had heard testimonies from an elderly man who had been desperately, brutally tortured. We had heard from the testimonies of the widows of the Cradock Four, and it was just all too much in the end. And then, as you say, it is an iconic moment. The Archbishop just laid his head down on the table in front of him and wept. And it has led to very beautiful poetry and very beautiful writing about that particular moment. So maybe it was not a bad thing to happen, because it demonstrated to the world what a painful process this was going to be. And there was little time in which to achieve it. To communicate that in that way was extraordinary, completely unplanned, but extraordinary. But afterwards, and I think this exactly sums up the way the Archbishop approached these things, he said, I am never, ever going to let that happen again. Because what happened was that all those TV cameras focused on me. And that's not where the focus should be. The focus should be on the people who are testifying before us. And he kept his word. He was never overcome by his emotions again, whatever he was feeling inside himself.
Sure. Lastly, Mary Burton, you mentioned, the difficulty of having heard those testimonies, and one of the groups of people you mentioned there is the Cradock Four. Now, I'm not seeking to get you to comment on the current processes that are either happening or not happening around, justice for some of the victims of apartheid and people whose loved ones were killed under that system. But what I'm trying to ask you is, the legacy of your commission, the commission in which you served with the late Arch, continues to be contested. And I suppose it will happen more and more the further away we move from you having started that work in 1995 and completing it some 2.5 years later with your volumes of reports. Just to the future, to the current generation and perhaps to posterity, how should we understand the work that you have done in relation to the need for justice to be done? You, for example, have spoken of something that's called, that you've termed a register of reconciliation in the past. Marry all of those aspects for me. Restorative justice, but also where instances called for retributive justice, as happened at the end of your commission, there were calls for that. How important are all of those to come together into their fruition?
Yes, indeed. Truth commissions everywhere in the world are of themselves imperfect processes. They can only tell a part of the truth. They can reveal some of the underlying causes of the truth, and they need to have a way of restoring some kind of balance to the society that has been torn apart. South Africa's TRC did some things very well. And I think we can be very proud of the records that are left, the history that is left for coming generations. But where we have failed is where the unfinished business of the TRC remains. The prosecutions that have not happened, the reparations that are incomplete, and the whole process is damaged by that. I believe myself that the best thing that we can do in Archbishop Tutu's memory is to continue the struggle that he fought for, the struggle for social justice, the struggle for equal rights for everybody. And part of that is dealing with the unfinished business, bringing about justice, not necessarily in a spirit of vindictiveness, but in order to show that justice works, the law works, we have to trust it. And prosecutions are there to find those who escape the net of amnesty and ought to be brought to justice so that the families of the victims can know the full truth at last. Without that, the work is incomplete. But the work of our country is also incomplete. The justice that Bishop Tutu was referring to even as long ago before he was an archbishop, the need for equality and justice and equal opportunities for all South Africans, that's the task that he has left to the rest of us.
Sure. And I said to my previous guest that it would be unfair of me to not give him the opportunity, that's John Steenhuisen, to reflect on the late Arch's humanity. And there are so many of these anecdotes. He seemed to have an anecdote for almost everything. There's one where he talks about, he sort of tells a joke that I saw where he talks about how, have you heard this one in the style of delivering a joke? Have you heard the one about the Archbishop who dies and goes to heaven but is not let in and is sent to what the Archbishop would call the other place? And once he's sent there, cut a long story short, he says a few weeks later the devil knocks on the door of heaven. When it's opened, he says, "You sent Desmond Tutu to the other place, and now he's causing all sorts of trouble, and I now need political asylum from that other place." Just one of those instances where his humanity and his ability to relate some kind of an anecdote or, crack a joke always tended to make a point or diffuse the situation. Now, without me taking the spotlight, because I didn't walk the path with him, you did. What are some of the best moments for you? What are some of the best jokes that you've ever heard him tell?
Well, I don't think I remember the jokes so much, but what I remember of the warmth of his humanity is the way everybody wanted to be with him. Everybody wanted to be recognized by him. So, for example, in the Truth Commission offices around the country, we usually had tea breaks during the morning, and if the Archbishop was in that town at that day, he would come in and greet people. And everybody wanted to cluster around, wanted to hug, wanted to be noticed by him, wanted to greet him. And it was that real love of individual human beings, no matter who they were, no matter their status, was what made a difference in his attitude to people, whoever they were and wherever he encountered them.